Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the second in the series of the what did we call this? I've forgotten. I'm having anyway, it's the second in the series of three webinars that Arizona Preservation Foundation is sponsoring along with the State Historic Preservation Office. We call this Preservation in Place, i.e., you are where you are and we are where we are. And we hope that you find these to be exceedingly informative as far as that goes. We do have a few housekeeping rules. We like everyone to make sure that they are muted and that their camera is off. If you have questions about what the speaker has said, please put those questions in the chat and we will answer those questions. We'll have the speaker answer those questions at the end of her presentation. Also, I'm going to put into the chat, in case you did come last week and you missed, came in late, or you didn't come last week and you really want to see that program, I am going to put in the chat the link to the Arizona Preservation Foundation YouTube so that you can view it, and it's free. I also, for those of you who came last week and it was mentioned about the Grinnell article, we have a link that you can access that article for free through January of 2026. So with that, I will turn this over to Margaret Hannigan, who is my co-host in presenting and figuring out what kind of webinars we have. Oh, and don't forget, if you have a question or maybe an idea about a webinar, we would love to hear that. So you can put that in the chat too. Margaret, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing Mary Ellen Welch, who is the Cultural Resources Compliance Manager for the State Historic Preservation Office. Mary Ellen received her MA in Anthropology or Archaeology from Northern Arizona University in 1993 and has worked in the field of archaeology since 1985. She joined the State Historic Preservation Office as a compliance specialist in 2013 and became the Cultural Resource Compliance Manager in 2018. Her current interests include collaborating with her compliance team, tribes, consultants, and agencies to help improve current professional standards and State Historic Preservation Office guidance. And as I know very personally, the girl loves the beach. So take it away, Mary Ellen.
Okay, thanks everyone. I am not currently at the beach. Let me just pull up my presentation and I will get started. Okay, is that working for everybody in?
Yeah, we can see it just fine.
Okay. Excuse me. So thanks for joining me here today. I just want to say, I hope you come away from this with a better understanding of the State Historic Preservation Act, and particularly when it applies to the projects that you're working on in the state of Arizona. Before getting into the State Act, let me give you some background and address what is SHPO. Each state and U.S. territory has a SHPO, and the role of the office is defined in Section 101 of the National Historic Preservation Act. The NHPA was enacted in 1966 as a direct result of population growth across the country and a concurrent increase in infrastructure that led to the destruction of important places that provided us with a sense of identity. The Act directs federal agencies to consult with SHPOs on undertakings as defined in Section 106, that is, projects on federal land or involving federal funds, licenses, and permits. The SHPO's role is to advise and assist federal, state, and local governments in matters of historic preservation. Different states house the SHPO in different agencies. In Arizona, we're part of Arizona State Parks and Trails. We've had 10 SHPOs since the first one was appointed in 1967, and hopefully our office will continue to be staffed for a long time. Why I say this is because this past summer we went through a period of uncertainty as we weren't sure if we were going to get our allocated funds, which is from the National Historic Preservation Fund. They finally came through, yet we're going to go through the same process in 2026 for the funds. The HPF derives from offshore drilling. And this year, this President Skinny budget has us zeroed out. We know that there was a bipartisan effort before the shutdown to address the funding. So hopefully, once the government opens, that will be addressed again. I want to make it clear that we currently do not get funds from the state. Our required match for the HPF has been made with the use of volunteer hours from the Site Steward program. About the advocacy efforts in chat, and Margaret, you might want to post it a couple of times in the chat that there is going to be a forum hosted by the National Trust on Historic Preservation on November 19th to address Section 106 and advocacy. SHPO attended a meeting last week where we provided information to Senator Gallego's office about the work that SHPO does, and we appreciate all support. So, as I said, the NHPA was passed in '66, and the first Arizona SHPO was brought in '67. There were no state regulations guiding the SHPO really until 1974, when the State Parks Board was established and directed the SHPO to advise, assist, and monitor as appropriate federal and state agencies and political subdivisions of the state in carrying out their historic preservation responsibilities. As you can hear, this is pretty vague. Historic preservation responsibilities was not really defined. It wasn't until 1982 that the State Historic Preservation Act was enacted, and it defines the historic preservation requirements for state agencies. Note that agency refers to the state only, not municipalities and counties. Apparently, there was a divergence at some point. I am not sure when, with a lawsuit. And while the Arizona Antiquities Act, which was written well before the State Act, includes municipalities and counties, the State Act does not. Okay, so the State Act contains 4 parts, which in turn are subdivided in each statute, and we'll briefly go through these. It's a lot of information, and I know that we're going to be putting the PowerPoint available online, the recording, I mean. So more background first. Many state agencies don't have historic preservation specialists or archaeologists. Exceptions include ADOT, state land, forestry, game and fish. And we work with them to help develop efficiencies and consultation, which I'll talk about later. Not surprisingly, many state agencies have and continue to question their duties under the State Act. This is why the guidelines were prepared. It's not just wishful thinking on SHPO's part. They've been approved by the State Attorney General and the Arizona State Parks Board. And in 2023, the guidelines were adopted as substantive policy and certified by the Secretary of State. So SHPO has been proactive to ensure that the guidelines and our interpretation of the statute are legally valid. And I know when we discuss these responsibilities with state agencies, they also have their agency's own attorney general review the guidelines. And so far, we have not met any further resistance to ensuring their applicability. And as I said, it's now substantive policy. So what does it mean? What's under an agency's authority or control? So let's provide an example. Here is Robbins Butte, which is located, Robbins Butte petroglyphs, which are located on game and fish land. Arizona Game and Fish is therefore responsible for ensuring that vandalism doesn't occur and protects its resources, even if they're open for public visitation. Sometimes it's difficult for us to get state agencies to understand that they are responsible for the existing resources on their land, including archaeological sites. It's about the idea, to many agencies, this is too abstract for them to understand. Their mission does not include the preservation of cultural resources, but the state's act ensures that they are protected to some extent. So 41-864 says in part that any plans of a state agency which involve property which is included or may qualify for inclusion on the Arizona Register of Historic Places, including any construction, project, sale, lease, or acquisition of historic properties, should be reviewed for management. Basically, a good example of this is the Orphaned Wells project, where the Department of Environmental Quality received a grant of federal monies not subject to Section 106 of the NHPA, because ADEQ is a state agency and will be remediating the wells. Surveys being conducted to assess the project areas as well as the wells themselves to see if historic properties are present. Surveys where needed. Not everything requires a survey. Another example of how the law applies is the smelter. If it was on state land, approving an application for demolition would trigger the State Act. If the smelter was on private land, permits from ADEQ would still trigger the State Act, because private land alone doesn't stop the need to have review of agency plans. It's, again, the state's action. So at the beginning of the presentation, we indicated that 41-861 has two parts. Note that although it is the chief administrator's responsibility to ensure these measures, they can delegate to staff. The State Act responsibilities cannot be delegated to consultants, but the agency can use their expertise for drafting letters and offering sound advice. We rely on what the consultants bring to the table to the state agencies. And there are agencies that have contracted employees from the consulting world to assist them with their compliance responsibilities. But the agency is still the one that's responsible. State agencies are also required to evaluate the current use of any building that's a historic property. SHPO was formerly headquartered in the historic Evans House on Washington Street, which was a doctor's house and offices in 1893. It's listed in the National Register of Historic Places. It's also therefore eligible for the Arizona Register. And I'm going to talk about the register separately in a minute or two. During COVID, SHPO and other state agencies were mandated to minimize their business footprint, the physical footprint of the agency. So a bunch of state agencies were now housed in a fewer buildings. So we're in what's now the Natural Resources Building behind the Evans House. So the Evans House now sits vacant in downtown Phoenix. It's been mothballed, at least to some extent, meaning it's been secured against vandalism, as you can see from the fencing, and the utilities have been shut down. I'm really not sure if other protective measures have been put in place for it. Hopefully there will be some future adaptive reuse of the building. So an agency, before they can get rid of a building, whether it's through a transfer or a lease or something else, has to consider whether or not the building is still viable for use. So when an agency undertakes historic preservation, it must use professionals. We have standards for archaeologists and architects. The Arizona Preservation Foundation has a list of the Secretary of the Interior qualified professionals for working on the built environment projects, like for Adobe, moving buildings, roofing, and more. And the Arizona State Museum maintains a list of those professionals that are permitted under the Arizona Antiquities Act. Excuse me. So for archaeological survey on state, county, or municipal lands, the agency must use an ASM permitted consultant. SHPO will always tell any of our inquiries to look at that list. We don't keep a list of ourselves. It's not our responsibility, but we do refer them to the AAA permit list of qualified consultants. We don't make recommendations either. So although there is no requirement for state agencies to employ archaeologists or historic preservation specialists, we do recommend that a single point of contact in each department be assigned these duties. Tribal consultation is not mandated by the State Act. However, it is mandated under ARS 41-2051, and SHPO recommends it occur at the same time as State Act consultation. I'll say this a couple of times. We also strongly recommend and highly encourage agencies consult concurrently with the State Museum when a AAA permit isn't necessary for the project. So you're consulting under the State Act, but the AAA permit also requires the State Museum's review. In the past, it would be something that was done when a project was submitted for curation, and there would be multiple versions of reports out there, of final reports. So in this way, the coordination allows us to know that there is a single report, final report for curation. So how can SHPO help with identifying preservation needs? Our office consists of a staff of archaeologists, an architect, and other historic preservation specialists who all have unique backgrounds and are experts in their areas. We're here to provide technical advice throughout the course of a project, and we offer training such as today's, and we can offer other trainings such as on the Secretary of the Interior's standards, Section 106, if you can't get it through the Advisory Council, which we do recommend. And this picture here shows SHPO architect Susan Lawson with our CLG coordinator, Ariana Urban, and our National Register coordinator, Bill Collins, consulting regarding the First Baptist Church, now the award-winning Monroe Street Abbey venue, which we saw at the Historic Preservation Conference last year. 41862 is about state agency programs, and it's broken into 3 parts. Consistent with the NHPA, SHPO is required to establish a program to locate, inventory, and nominate to the Arizona Register of Historic Places all properties under their ownership or control that appear to meet the criteria for inclusion. Each state agency is required to maintain an inventory of their properties so they are not inadvertently sold or destroyed. And annually, a report is provided to the governor and legislature on the performance of state agencies. It used to be with the Historic Advisory Commission, and now it's with SHPO. We prepare that report. So let's focus a little bit on the Arizona Register, which was established to mirror the National Register of Historic Places, and the efforts for identification, eligibility, and listing follow the same process and practice. Like the National Register, we recognize 5 property types: building, site, structure, district, and object. And we use the same term, historic properties, for those types that have been determined eligible for or listed in the Arizona Register of Historic Places. Anything that is evaluated under the State Act is also automatically considered the same eligibility under the National Historic Preservation Act. And to be clear, nominating properties does not mean listing them to the register, which is a much more substantial project. We're just evaluating their eligibility. The 2 most common ways historic properties are identified are by archaeological survey and built environment inventories. So let's talk a minute about the process for identifying historic properties. And this applies again for the state or national register. First, some terms that everybody needs to be familiar with. Historic properties is often confused among non-practitioners or first-time report writers. It's meant to be here, both historic in age, which is at least 50 years old, and determined eligible for listing. So the historic context refers to patterns or trends in history by which a property or site is understood and its meaning within history or prehistory is made clear. The determination of eligibility requires placing the identified resource, the site, building, structure, object, or district, in the appropriate context to evaluate its significance, and also requires an assessment of the integrity of the resource. Significance refers to the ability of the property to meet one of the 4 National Register criteria within a historic context. So I always give this example in brief because a statement is not the same as what we're looking for in reports. But if you're thinking about archaeology, your context statement might be Hohokam irrigation practices along the Salt River during the sedentary period. That gave me my cultural affiliation, my time period, and the theme of Hohokam irrigation practices. So the significance refers to that ability for the property to convey the importance of that context. In the case of many sites around the valley, we're talking about what kinds of features do they still convey. And remember, when you're talking about eligibility, it's has yielded or has the potential to yield information for archaeology in particular. To the right of the screen, I have the eligibility criteria. Integrity is the ability of the property to convey significance through physical features and context. And there are 7 aspects of integrity: location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And the property only has to meet one aspect of integrity. And I also caution people not to confuse integrity with physical condition of the property that occurs as a result of damage or, just general wearing down or erosion. There are 2 very distinct things. And because this is such a complicated process and we ourselves have had trouble writing down what we mean, we are actually in the process of doing that, and there will be another webinar in early in the new year to address reporting standards and the identification and evaluation of historic properties, specifically for archaeology. So put that in your calendar. 41.862 refers to agency stewardship. If the agency does not know where its historic properties are located, inadvertent impacts may happen. So what's necessary is that the agency complete the inventories and provide written reports to SHPO. It's, we don't expect that an agency can go out and survey 100% of its land, obviously. SHPO used to do a lot of building inventories. There are not the funds to do that anymore, so we wait for projects for it to happen, and that's what we're talking about here. So before any demolition, construction occurs, it's the agency's stewardship responsibilities that becomes part of the process for consulting with SHPO. Another part of the law is the state public records law, which allows agencies to treat information about historic properties confidentially and decline the release of information related to its location. And we're particularly talking about archaeological sites here. And this is one reason we request site location maps in the a confidential appendix of a report that's submitted. So if an agency is asked or FOIA'd for, not FOIA'd, but has a public records request, then they can remove that locational information. Part 3, the annual state agency compliance survey. As I said before, this is something that SHPO now does. It's a self-evaluation that the state agencies put together, and then we generate statistics for the number of consultations we've received, the number of adverse impact findings and all that. And we produce an annual report to the governor and legislature. And I tell you, these reports have come in very handy with all the issues concerning funding. We've been putting them out there for everybody to use, so you know what the key issues are. 41863, records and documentation standards. Agencies and SHPO work together to identify the appropriate level of documentation. Most of this is found in our state museum and SHPO reporting guidance. We can help identify the appropriate documentation measures that are needed. There are a lot of standard practices out there, and we've been advocating this last year or so for more creative ways to tell the story about a property that's going to be impacted by a project. Not just straight data recovery, perhaps, maybe a sample of data recovery and something else that tells the story about the archaeology. Because for us, it's archaeology. For the indigenous communities, it's their ancestral places. So we want to be really cognizant of that and more meaningful in our treatments. Part 2 of the Act states that the agency shall deposit the records with the Department of Library, Archives, and Public Records and with the State Historic Preservation Officer. Note that records at SHPO are not generally publicly accessible, but rather for internal use. We no longer maintain hard copies of the reports that were submitted. We do have a digital library now. And for ourselves, we provide only consultation letters to state archives because we don't produce the reports. They're not ours. So anybody that's making a public records request really should go to the state agency for that. And if they don't have it, ask if you can contact SHPO and copy us on that request. Copy the agency on the request when you do make it of SHPO. And the picture here is the State Archives building. 41-864 refers to the review of agency plans. This includes inventory reports, design plans, and other documents that are submitted to SHPO for review and comment. Note that unlike the National Historic Preservation Act, the State Act mandates that SHPO is provided a 30 working day to review and comment on the submitted items. And this means we don't count weekends and holidays. Under the NHPA, it's 30 calendar days. So specific examples of what plans that agencies should consult with SHPO on. Specifically, they're the plans that may affect historic properties for renovation, rehabilitation, modification, demolition, abandonment of buildings or structures, sale, lease, or transfer of real property, new construction, infrastructure development, issuing a right-of-way easement or permit, and granting state funds for various types of projects. So next we'll go to what this looks like in consultation. You'll notice these 4 steps on the slide are essentially the same as in section 106. Describe the agency plan, identify historic properties, assess impacts of plan on historic properties, avoid, minimize, or mitigate harm to historic properties. Do note that there is no APE in under the State Act, area of potential effects. That's only for section 106 review. So under the State Act, we are specifically referring to the project area. And while it is important that tribes have the opportunity to assess whether the impact will affect significant view sheds, for example, because of potential TCPs, traditional cultural places. We do not generally look at a larger area than where the construction or demolition will occur. So describe the agency plan. Recognize that SHPO may not be aware of technical agency-specific terminology or what all activities are included within that action. Provide us with all of the activities that may be involved that have the potential to impact the historic properties, and identify all project components, access routes, staging areas, and off-project components like borrow areas. Not having the information up front may delay our response, and if it comes to us in piecemeal, you're looking at another 30 days consultation. So identifying historic properties. Follow the existing standards and guidelines that SHPO and ASM have provided to avoid our asking for additional information. Use the appropriate professional, preferably one with an experience in Arizona. Conduct identification efforts with assistance as necessary. Know which record sources you should be looking at. The guidance documents that we all have online will help you with different types of properties that you're, inventorying. And I should note that we will be looking at revising the reporting standards to incorporate tribal perspectives in the near future. We'll start working on them next year. And we will continue to include, agencies and consultants in that review as well. Step 2, the evaluation continued. Unlike federal agencies, state agencies do not make determinations of eligibility or findings of impact. SHPO alone is responsible. These are based on the recommendations from the agency or the consultant, but SHPO may make alternate determinations from the recommendations. And that requires sufficient supporting documentation. And if the eligibility of a resource cannot be determined at the level of inventory, then the next step would be to consult with us, and we would recommend additional research or eligibility testing, whatever is appropriate. So the criteria for assessing impacts is also similar to Section 106. The agency, often with the assistance of the consultant, will assess the impacts, if any, the proposed projects will have on historic properties. Again, we're talking about destruction or damage, neglect or abandonment, construction, transfer, or lease. So again, you'll notice that we're saying impact now as opposed to under the NHPA where we're talking about effects. And specifically, this was done to make it clear that we are consulting under the State Act. And we made this change consciously a few years ago when several of the tribes told us they were concerned about the wording in some of the agency letters. They didn't know what the nexus was for the federal action when there was none. So in this sense, we moved forward and now just talk about impacts. The impact findings are also similar to the NHPA. No historic properties impact. There are none, or they were determined by SHPO to be ineligible. No adverse impact. There are listed or eligible properties, but the plan will not impact them through avoidance or redesign, or the type of work that's being done doesn't affect the character defining qualities of the resource. And then the last is that historic properties may be impacted. If that occurs, then the agency and SHPO work together to resolve any adverse impacts. So one place where the State Act differs from the NHPA is it does not require establishing agreement documents to help resolve adverse impacts. And again, while there's no tribal consultation in the State Act, we will always recommend consultation with tribes to determine an appropriate form of mitigation for projects involving archaeological sites and other potential properties of significance to tribes. We have again talked about ways to include tribes in consultation elsewhere. If you can't get hold of a tribe, reach out to the state, ask us to provide some assistance. And I will tell you, if you're not consulting, and we've been consulting, our letters will always ask about tribal concerns. So we do want to know that that's happening. One thing about the consultation process under the State Act is it does not involve the public, unlike an HPA. So that's a good thing for state agencies. If there is a project that becomes a federal undertaking, so a state project, and suddenly there are going to be federal funds or Corps of Engineer permitting for a Clean Water Act permit or other license, it's a whole new ballgame, as federal agencies must comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Good news for the state agencies, they can fulfill their SHPA requirements under Section 106 rather than duplicate the effort. Some agencies will do this, others will not. And I think it really depends on their relationship with the federal agency, because there have been examples of federal agencies steamrolling over the state agencies' role. And basically, the agencies should be coordinating and consulting together on the eligibility and impacts. Some federal agencies delegate Section 106 authority to a state agency. For example, the Land and Water Conservation Fund from the National Park Service has a recreational trails program that's delegated to ADOT. Another one that's delegated to state parks to administer. And others are with the BLM and NPS and Fish and Wildlife Service. So remember this, not knowing if there is federal involvement can cause delays if the federal agency is not involved in consultation early enough. It can also put the federal agency out of compliance with Section 106, and that will make the federal agency very unhappy. Ask us how we know. SHPO's request for additional information, again, starts the review clock over. There are times, I will say, that a state action cannot wait for the federal Section 106 consultation to be complete, and that's fine if it occurs prior to 106, as long as that information is provided then to the federal agency. And state agencies can ask SHPO to help them develop an agreement document that provides efficiencies for routine repetitive actions and in consultation. We encourage state agencies to enter into compliance agreements, the memorandum of agreement, interagency service agreement, intergovernmental agreements that outlines how the agency will comply with the State Act, and if appropriate, streamlining the consultation process. And I hate using the word streamlining. I know it's one that the tribes don't like. It's actually more of providing the efficiencies in consultation for SHPO. Tribes still need to be consulted. And through agreement on the types of projects that don't require consultation with SHPO. And we can also include standard treatment measures that we might agree upon. We have a great example with the Arizona Department of Transportation MOU. And that works well for everybody because it reduces the amount of work for the specialist and for SHPO both. We do prefer that an agency have a good track record of compliance and a designated historic preservation staff, but it doesn't always work that way. For example, we have agreement with Department of Environmental Quality now, and it took us a while to get to this, to reach an understanding of what the agency could do under the State Act by requiring their applicants to follow through with their consultation, because ADEQ does not own much land, but the projects occur throughout the state. So we do have an agreement in place that talks about how they will consult with us, and we do a little bit of basically collaboration where we talk about the project, we help them address whether or not there's going to be impacts to historic properties. And we've agreed then that the project can continue without further consultation. Others go through the standard State Act process. So let's talk a minute about what consultation is. It's our compliance review. Consultation is the process of seeking, discussing, and considering the views of other consulting parties, and where feasible, seeking agreement with them. This is essentially out of the NHPA. The State Act only requires that the agency consults with SHPO. Tribal consultation is not mandated. Again, I would refer you to 41-2051. And the agency does not have to involve the public or other interested parties. This is also one reason why we limit ourselves to the project area and not a wider potential area of effects, although the agency still has to consider indirect and cumulative effects within their project area. I recognize that there's a lot of detail in our guidance about what gets submitted to SHPO, but it's there for a reason. Without it, we have to go searching through the documents, and often there's discrepancy between what's in the report because it's an older report that was written for a different kind of project, which is fine, but the agency letter has to include everything that's needed for their current project. It should be on agency letterhead, signed by the responsible agency official. You might include the inventory report or plans and the maps showing the project location and historic property information. So we'll say it again. If we don't have the information needed, the 30-day review clock starts over when we get it. SHPO needs to know where you are planning the project and where impacts will occur specifically. Define the project area, written detail about the nature and extent of the proposed impacts. Show us on maps, not just the USGS topo location map that's in the report, but if it's helpful because there's a lot of different locations for proposed impacts, give us a Google Earth map with some reference point that we could also help us to identify maybe in another view of our site or something. We do actually do another review of easily available resources to double check sometimes on the potential impacts. Here, the road picture. If it's being realigned, where are the staging areas? Where would new materials come from? Where would millings be placed? That's the kind of information we want to know. This other side of a mining pit, we've got a lot of quarry projects that come through, and occasionally we'll see something, well, they're going to avoid a portion of the site by putting a fence up around it, or leave it open for avoidance. And you have to put a fence up in certain cases, because if you had a site in here that was going to be avoided, there's no way that would happen without fencing in place. And often there are certain projects that occur over years. Periodic monitoring has to happen over time and that'll have to be included in the consultation. So have a description of the project, including all ground disturbing activities. For architectural properties, indicate whether the proposed action involves maintenance, rehabilitation, new construction, demolition, or a combination. Include the specific funding being used. And by that, I only mean private, federal, or state. I don't need to know necessarily the specific source, but private, federal, or state. The land jurisdiction and how the project triggers the State Act. Is it through funding the land or permitting? Our guidance is pretty specific about this, especially on the survey report summary form, but we're still not getting it right a lot of the time. If the project area is different from or was changed since the area was surveyed, like the map provided in the survey report doesn't match the current project, again, the agency consultation letter should provide a separate map of the current project area and explain the difference. The survey report does not need to be updated, but the letter does need to address the discrepancy. Of course, if the revised project area has not been surveyed, additional survey may be recommended and a report addendum requested. SHPO needs to know what historic properties are present within the project area and how they were identified. The orange project area in the picture is intersected by a survey from 2005. It's at least 20 years old. Possibly, probably could use a resurvey. Minimally for SHPO, if it's not state land, let's say, we will want to know what changes have occurred over the landscape since the time of its recording. Google Earth helps. SHPO makes the actual determination of impact, and for the DOEs, as I mentioned, and the agency letters should include the agency recommendations, not just stating that the consultant recommended this and the agency agrees. It's your recommendation, your ownership, and that's what we're consulting on. And the agency doesn't have to agree with the recorder, and that's okay. It's up to the agency to determine whether or not they want the report revised. For SHPO, we may not agree, but we're not asking for a report revision. We're okay with the consultation letter as the ultimate and final word. So again, the letter should reference all information on all surveys that cover the project area, even if they were conducted for a different project, if they were batched. SHPO needs to know what finding of impact the agency is recommending. I know there are some agencies out there that would prefer the consultant not include a recommendation. I don't find that helpful myself. Neither the agency archaeologists nor the SHPO staff are in the field, so your recommendation is insightful, and I think should be included. But again, the letter needs to state what the agency recommends. So the impact is a result of a project action on any register eligible historic property. Again, there are 3 possible findings: no historic properties impacted, no adverse impact, or adverse impact. Sorry, this is a little repetitive. I'm just seeing that now. We want you to know that you thought about this, that you are aware of what your consultant is recommending. Cumulative impacts are ones that are foreseeable in the future. Example, a pole replacement project within a site. Numerous poles set at different times result in a Swiss cheesing effect across the site. And one more pole could be an adverse impact. So you as an agency person need to understand the full scope of work and the full extent of the recommendation, what that impact would be. So this slide just is a summation of what should be included in the consultation letter. Importantly, inform us if there are tribal concerns. We want to know what you are requesting. We don't want your letter just to say, this information is for SHPO consultation. What are you asking for? Is it adequacy on the report? Is it, are the identification efforts okay? Can you provide us a determination of eligibility based on our recommendations? What is the finding of impact? We need the agency to be specific in their questions to SHPO. And then also provide the contact information. Note that we do all of our consultation electronically, although we don't have a very good system in place for like E106. That's in one of our plans for the future. Hopefully it'll come to fruition. Probably not before I retire, but it's out there. So what else gets submitted to SHPO? the inventory report, of course. There are requirements as noted in the guidance by both SHPO and ASM. There are specific forms that can be used in place of a technical report. I'm not going to go into detail on the report because we want to do that in a full, in-depth look at reporting requirements. But just make sure you look at the SHPO webpage and the ASM web pages about what's required. SHPO and ASM over the years have done their best to coordinate and, when possible, put the same requirements in place. So, in one document. It's not always the case. ASM has, the requirement for research design for surveys of 640 acres or more, which we adopted as well. We were fine putting that in the report at the end, the results report. ASM wants it up front. Because of that, we would also like the opportunity to be able to review that document at the beginning. So if you're submitting a research design for an archaeological permit, please also submit it to SHPO for review. We don't feel like we should comment on it at the end when a report comes in. So we are going to be turning that into a requirement as well. Excuse me. There are certain kinds of requirements for what should be submitted for building documentation. We have a historic property inventory form for buildings. We also have a historic and use structure form for in-use historic structures. In case you're not aware, ASM does not identify these as sites if they're in use. So we have some archival information, but we're not getting a lot of these forms. But also for the architectural drawings and built environment, photographs are really important, and a written description about where impacts will occur. Okay, initial consultation don't include budget ever. What was I going to say? SHPO can be consulted on everything together except the monitoring discovery plan or a treatment or the archival research at a data recovery level. So like in section 106, and I say that because that's where my strength really is, you can consult with our office on the project area or the APE, the identification efforts and the results at once. Other SHPOs don't allow that. We certainly do because we recognize projects need to move forward. Important point there is that project planning is the responsibility of a proponent, applicant, and then the agency. And I do realize that not all agencies have control over what happens on their land, because a proponent will come in to want to do some leasing or put up a tower or whatever. But the earlier that we know about a project, the better the consultation process will be. So only consult with us on the treatments after it's been determined that there's no adverse impact, or an adverse impact, I mean. Hold off for that response from SHPO. Consultant's role in consultation. Some state agencies need more assistance from consultants than others. QA, QC, can't say it enough. Consultants, you need to do a better job. Agencies, I know you're slammed for time as well, but we need to know that you've reviewed the report and agree with what's in the report. So you need to be a little more thorough in your reviews as well. If you have younger staff that needs additional training, talk to SHPO, we can help. Not everybody is coming out of the gate, from getting their degrees with an idea of what goes into a report. Show them some examples of reports that were submitted and didn't get much in the way of comments from our agency or ASM, and let that be their starting points. Consultants can draft consultation letters for agencies. If they submit the consultation letter on behalf of the agency must be copied on the email. Again, you can offer your expertise and recommendations to the agency for their use in decision-making, but your recommendations to SHPO should not be conveyed in a personal format like that. We are seeing some use of AI. I don't know how agencies feel about it. We haven't decided yet, and I can tell you that it's AI because it makes no sense. For example, we've been consulted on the eligibility of a project area. That doesn't work. So if you're using AI, check the information for accuracy. It's the same thing as the old cut and paste, from what we've done in the past with culture histories, and oops, the wrong area is being discussed. Don't put anything in there that you're not certain of. So best consultation practices, SHPO put a notice to feds and state agencies and local governments out regarding this in 2024. It's been on our website for the last year. Consultants and agencies must review their products before submittal to SHPO. Make sure the survey identification efforts and report are adequate. Use the qualified consultants. Note that we do review on a first come, first served basis. If you do have a project that needs to be expedited, we will try to put that into our time. There's no guarantee. And if a AAA permit was involved, again, consult concurrently with SHPO and the ASM. And there you go. I'm going to stop sharing and ask if there are any questions.
This is Margaret. We do have one question in the chat. The question is, and folks, if you have others, now's a good time to stick them in the chat. The question we have right now is there a list of which agencies delegate to others?
From the federal level to the state level, I can tell you that it depends on certain things like FHA, WA, and ADOT. ADOT has assumed FHWA responsibilities. And there's certain things that there's a delegation of authority, there's an assumption of authority, and there's just, I don't know how it's actually stated. HUD delegates to applicants and such. EPA delegates their water treatment to WIFA. So that becomes more of a federalized rather than state action. But no, we don't have a specific list.
Okay. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Anyone want to raise their hand? Are there other questions out there?
I do know it's a lot of information that we presented. And, the part that interests those of us in the compliance part, the archaeology compliance, of course, is more associated with the identification and the evaluation of resources. So again, I want to say that we will be doing a more thorough presentation on that in the fall. We do want to assist better with, we've been commenting a lot that get rid of your culture history, put in your historic context, but people don't have a good starting point. So we will be working on that.
And a reminder, this is being recorded. We will get the link out to those who registered. So yes, you're right. It is a lot of information. And if you have questions that come in later, we can certainly reach out to Mary Ellen if something comes up later and you want to, after you've re-looked at it or thought about it for a little time. So don't feel like this is your only time to ask questions. But if there's anything burning, I do notice that Donna did put in the web into the chat, the reminder about next week's presentation, navigating the complex web of situations where more than one state or federal cultural resource law applies. So that is coming up next week. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the in the chat? Donna, are you seeing anything?
Well, I did put a number of things in the chat. So
Okay.
the link to last week's presentation was put in there for those who were there last week and they were talking about that particular article that had a firewall. There's the link to access that article for free. And that's also in the chat. And I think that's about it. Again, if you have ideas for a subject that you would like to see us do in the future, please let us know. And you can put that in the chat. You can email us and we'll get that message, or you can email Connie and she'll pass it on. And we thank everyone. We thank Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen will also, you're doing team tagging next week. Is that correct?
Erin Davis and Shannon Plummer are doing next week.
Okay. So Mary Ellen is not here next week, but we will have two people working on that complex web of situations. Probably should have held that on Halloween.
There is a comment in there. I would point out to Mary Ellen, it says we would love guidance on MPTI.
NPTI.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. Laura, did you?
She's with
No potential
potential
to
to
impact.
So that's I can speak to that, following along with, it's an agency's decision about what is an action. And in the same way that it's a federal agency's decision of what is an undertaking. So the agency consults with us if they determine that there is a potential for impacts to historic properties. There are some kinds of activities that have no potential to impact. So if you're going into an archaeological site or you're going out and you're hand thinning, that would be no potential to impact because you're only going in out with hand tools. And that does not need consultation. The Corps probably, does this more than anybody because they don't consult with us on a lot of things. We don't have a PA in place. But sometimes the agreement documents will actually list these no potential to impacts out, but they really don't have to be in an agreement if it is one of the agency's responsibilities and they can demonstrate that there's no impact, no potential to impact.
And it looks like this is from the ADOT's State Act agreement.
Yeah.
Is where this question's coming from.
So generally it is like there often will have a list of activities that don't need consultation on. So they're little to no potential to impact. We've agreed that the review is usually done, a desktop review to determine that there's no sites or that the types of sites won't be affected by whatever is going to be done. Some of it doesn't even require that kind of review.
And there is another question, and let me just add real quickly, and I know this from experience. If you're not sure how to interpret these things, give SHPO a call. They're more than happy to help you and discuss and help you through this process. And I know this from years of experience of working with them. So, if you have a question, give them a call. They'll help you. The next question is can you address the responsibilities of certified local governments under the State Act?
No, I can't. Certified local governments are under the Federal National Historic Preservation Act. The role of governments, there is, as far as I know, maybe Erin, who is on, knows more, but I don't think there's any provision under the State Act for it. So local governments are not required to consult with SHPO under the State Act. We do get a lot of non-mandated consultation from the local governments, but that's about all I can tell you.
Okay, please comment on situations where disturbance is under existing pavement or other area that has been previously disturbed.
Sure. I can give you an example. What we always refer to is our downtown Phoenix area where we know that there are canal alignments and evidence of intact HOCOM features and sites at a depth below the pavement. So in certain locations, we will require monitoring for that reason alone. Even if the project has been previously disturbed, it depends on what the depth of your current project is. So if the original disturbance was only 18 inches and you're going down 24, yeah, we might actually request a monitor there because we don't know what could potentially be there. And that's based on, the available information about what survey has been done and what those results have been, or what other data recovery has been. Does that help?
Let's see. Yeah, and I know that's a question a lot of people. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
response is yes, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I can tell you that projects in like the ADOT right of way, ADOT will do a great job of reviewing the plans and all to ensure that disturbances will not affect potentially portions of sites that have not been investigated. So it really depends on the full scope of the project that is known to SHPO at that time, and they do a great job providing that kind of information to us.
Mhm. Let's see. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat at the moment. Again, I strongly recommend that if anything comes up, reach out to SHPO. They're there to help you. I see another one. SHPO does a great job guiding us too.
Thank you, Laura. Now we are here, there are 5 archaeologists, 1 architect, 1 historian for guidance under the State Act. Any of us can answer your questions at any time. There's an email, azshippo@azstateparks.gov. You can just put a general question in there and it'll be sent to the right person. Or if you have somebody you're more comfortable speaking to, certainly just reach out and talk to that person. Our contact information is on the webpage. Don't forget, we also have the government to government consultation toolkit. That gives you also the list of agencies that the archaeology compliance specialists review. So that's also helpful if you have specific questions and want to know who to talk to.
Donna, do you have any other last words?
No, we thank you very much for attending. And for those of, this is the first time that you've attended one of our webinars on the Arizona Preservation YouTube channel, there are recordings of previous webinars that we've held over the last 4 years, 3 to 4 years. And you can look at those anytime you want. And hopefully they will provide information that you might find useful.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff there. So do check it out.
So with that being said, I would say that we will close the meeting. Hopefully this recording will be up before the next one, and you will be able to catch up for all the stuff that in case you came in late or had to get off early. And we will see you next week.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, too.
My pleasure.
Mhm.